Hello. Can you hear me now? I feel like I'm on that ridiculous commercial. Good, good. Okay, let me get your work real quick. Okay, sorry about the lag there. Um, okay, in either chat area, would you tell me a little bit about what you were looking for in this piece and where I might be able to offer some ideas or thoughts on things, or if you just want me to freeform and mention a few things. So I'm going to read this back. My goal in this piece was creating a portfolio ready hero asset. I'm pretty new to 3D art, but I'm in my junior year of my program. So I want to really push my work toward the direction of at least being ready for internships and junior level positions. This prop is the hero asset for an abandoned music room environment. The music room is in a school that's been abandoned. In this environment, the floor and the roof have partially broken apart, and there is greenery growing through the cracks in the floor, and there's dirt and debris strewed around. I'd say a few decades have passed since this piano was in use. Also, this is my first proper attempt at a prop with a realistic treatment of materials. Okay, let me go over a couple of initial thoughts I had, looking at first the different properties, and I'm going to go about this by um, properties in terms of like the wood itself, the varnish, the paint, the different wear and tear and pieces, and also the change in the states of those things. So, a couple of initial thoughts are the paint itself on the piano. So, with greater and lesser dilapidation in a piano, and I actually got a piano recently. We didn't need to restore it too much, but there is a little bit of varnishing we need to do. There's variability because as the varnish on the wood and the stain on the wood, if the wood has been stained, that will affect wood variably. Some of it will enter the grain more and less. Some of the wood grain will be more or less protected. I see you've got edge wear on the piano now. But there would be areas where there might still be areas of gloss from areas that the varnish on the piano hasn't worn as quickly or have been protected. There might be areas where the gloss also, if it's in a dilapidated area and if it's gotten heat, the varnish might turn cloudy or somewhat pearlescent and opaque. So there's a number of properties to think of with this in terms of how a thing falls apart. So I'll take white here and do this. So like in occluded areas, there might be more protection and areas where there's more integrity to the materials. So in these areas, there might be more clarity. Actually, I'm going to put that in red. Okay, pieces here might have some better protection. That said, if it's out in the environment, also cracks will start to get, or concavities, intrusional areas will start to gather up debris and dust. So in these areas, there might be greater, even piled, and some noise involving dust. Oftentimes, and I see this a bit with like 3D pieces, initial ones where like edge wear and whatnot are fairly they can be push button, but they are like a favorite. They're an easy thing to see, and it gives an immediate sense of authenticity. But edgeware can start to also signal that a a process or a procedure has been done that's automatic, because in the real world, edgeware will have it's a part of history. So with like different parts of edgeware, depending on, like, if you make up and write out even a history for this piano, what's happened to it, edgeware can include things having to do where edges have been damaged from moving, from wrists, and use, touching the edge of the piano. There might be things like if there was a lid, for example, here on the top of the piano, there might be edgeware along these edges, and also in the place where it makes contact. In other places, the edges might show some pristine, they might not be used or show wear and tear at all. Areas like here might be more protected. On the interior here, the edges might be more protected. Just areas that might be more prone to being bumped, hit, worn, they'll tend to be more meaningful in terms of where you want to place focused and change wear and tear. So the wear and tear on those places won't be uniform. Like if there's been a situation where you've run into an edge more than once, or the edge wear has signs of drag, or something has gone on that not only is it edge wear, but there's been some injury to the piano, that area in particular has damaged the varnish. There can be humidity that's gone in then and flaked away at edges. And so you can inch by inch start to say, okay, this isn't just edge wear. The damage here on the edge and the wear and tear have partially to do with time, partially to do with use, partially to do with decay, sun, bleaching, things along those lines. Let me ask you real quick: Isher, is any of that making good does any of that have good clarity and sense to it? If so, I'll go on a little bit further. Or if you have any questions, we can look at a couple of other parts that we can focus on in terms of some of the matte of the wood staining and wood varnishing, and I think there was a different render as well. and on some of the internal wear and tear and metals. I'll wait for just a moment for you. A real quick thought on this area here, which I'm thinking is metal. The piano itself. One of the things with the metal here that might be a helpful piece, and I think I can actually draw this in real quick, is the frequency and size of the wear and tear on any metal pieces and detail in here. So there might be much more, and let's see back. And at times higher sheen, and okay. Escher said, "This is all great. Also, I feel like I should add that I haven't learned ZBrush yet. So I was hoping to go back in and work on it some more after that, hence the chunky soundboard cutout, etc." Okay, a quick thought on that. ZBrush is a fantastic tool. You might it might be a thing to actually use Substance Painter or even hand paint maps. And ZBrush works for that as well. Mari, any of the programs, Body Paint even. I haven't used that in a long time, from Maxon. This may have more to do with the types of map you're plugging in than which particular program. So with this, you might want to have spec maps that delineate areas that are have a higher roughness, areas that have higher gloss, or different areas where you want to control the Fresnel. For this, a couple of things. I would say that the programs you're using to get to those ends will all have a common need that you'll have to address, and those will be what property you're looking for. So, for example, in any of these things, because they don't look like they're massive detail, I mean massive form or structural damage, it might be that you can use the maps to show with superficial information or surface information what it is that's going on with them. One of the things I'm working on right now is taking and making sure that the wear and tear on the debris and grunge here is to a good scale. So if it looks like there's a mass of very cloudy single smudge, basically one area that's an area of uniform cloudiness, almost like a Photoshop brush was dragged across with a little bit of grunge on the edges. It will read toy-like. It'll read like it was a mass. Whereas if you have several areas with wear and tear that has detail, noise that has tendrils, falls off, small scratches, some things that are even difficult to see, this will read very well. It'll read as if it's large. It gives the implication that the closer in you get to it, the more wear and tear and damage and age, basically the history of the machine itself, will start to be intuitive. You don't necessarily have to put every last detail into a thing to have the audience understand, especially if they're looking at it at a glance, that what they're looking at has wear and tear. Like just doing the few areas I've gotten here, in terms of like the scratching and whatnot, we can start to imagine and let our brain fill in the details that the piano has a lot of high frequency and small noise without actually having to put in the high frequency and small noise. You can take a large noisy area and then target an accent with smaller refined linear areas, and it reads as. Let me see. The next thing I wanted to go over, or the first thing I wanted to go over. Come on, there we go. The matte painting on this gives it kind of a look of poster paint on cardboard. That's not a criticism. That's to state basically the properties that it seems like it's made of. And the reason for that is that cardboard, highly absorbent, it will tend to matte even things that have some gloss because it absorbs. And the poster paint is a matte rough finish. Even if the piano is super old and in some beat up condition, it might be expected that there are areas of gloss and shine, possibly sticking to the fiber of the wood itself. And if not, it may, and this depends, and this is a thing that you can do to help give over a sense of history to it. Depending on the type of varnish, it may cloud and peel and chip a bit, and then parts of it might still retain some glossiness. So giving over to the decay of the varnish, and also the decay of the wood stain, the wood itself splitting and getting to see between the cracks of the wood stain might also help. And even in that, a third level of the wood itself that's being revealed, showing signs of desiccating and bleaching and falling apart. So each different piece, the varnish, the wood stain, the preserved wood versus the more vulnerable wood, each of those having a different breakdown of decay, each one giving a different signal of history, so that when somebody looks at this, they can go, oof, many things are happening here. The different defenses and shields have broken down, and each property is now differentiating itself from the others. So we can actually see a layered sense of what was once a cohesive, shiny whole is now basically onioning. You know, it's basically splitting into different layers, visible layers, and losing its integrity. Let me see. One of the areas here that, like on the leg, that also I wanted to point out was there may be wear and tear on this guy, but we might want to look at where the wear and tear is. So it might be sided, depending on how and where this has been sitting. It might actually be that if it's in some exposed place, it will get more or less sun and suffer more or less sun bleaching, which, if that's the case, there may be varnish that tends to crack and peel along certain guidelines or certain rules, fracture rules for the type of varnish it is, the heat of the sun that it's in, or possible wind, rain, or otherwise that it may be subject to. and that will be sided, so the direction where it gets that most will obviously be getting more damage than other parts. But then there's also going to be parts that are shielded more so than other parts, where again, varnish might there might be a lead-in showing where the varnish is fringing on the edges, uplifting, turning cloudy, but as it gets to a higher part, may still show some gloss and some integrity still in some of the varnish. You can even add a few things like yellowing to it, so that it shows that even if it is glossy, it isn't very pure or necessarily nice. So that when you give the wear and tear, again, you're giving not only texture, as in like a set rote number of things, but you're telling the history in particular of this piano. With surfacing and texturing, you are doing several stacks of history and storytelling. So if you think of it like that, like the shape and form of the object is one type of character, and the texturing and the wear and tear on the texturing is still another type of narrative. Thinking of texturing and surfacing, it is helpful to understand that it is narrative. You are telling a story. It isn't just properties. It's properties in time with a particular thing and a particular history. So to texture something and make it one, feel natural, but also stand out as a story item or a narrative piece, it is helpful to make it its own character, and its own character will have particular damage or integrity. It will have a texture that might be a separate story than the integrity, the battle damage to the piano itself might be different than the texture damage, which will have a more subtle grinding effect. So just a couple of thoughts there. Okay. Hi, Leap, how are you? Absolutely. If you wouldn't mind putting putting your piece on the Discord stream, and also telling me a little bit about it, we'll grab that piece as we go. Okay. Escher, were there any more questions on the piano thing or comments? There is one thing I did want to ask about the hands on there. Could you tell me a little bit about the hands on the piano? Oh, Escher said this has all been extremely helpful. Thank you so much. My pleasure. That'll be $5, American. Don't try to cheat me. Just kidding. It's free. Waiting for another couple of pieces there. I'm going to do a couple of responses. Sorry, I don't know if that's professional streaming. I'm new. Okay. And I want to grab a couple of the pieces from last week, as as well. But I don't want to grab them if the participants aren't here. I don't want to accidentally tear into somebody's work and not have them here to yell at me should I do so. Escher has replied, yes, so I was playing with the idea that an incident happened in the room where the piano used to be. Which led to the school being abandoned, like someone awoke to magical powers and they destroyed the room, sort of thing. So the handprints are from the incident. Okay, so the handprints on the piano here. Let me turn that off. Are from a magical source. Okay. Well, I wonder, and this is just an alternative version. It isn't. I wouldn't take this as like the definition to go by. But I'm wondering if doing a thing instead, where if they made contact with it and they were awake with the powers, I just made that term up. Copyright, trademark. It's mine. A thing might be that there's effects and signs that they prematurely or dramatically burned through and affected the different materials. But that their hands burned the surface instead of clearing the area white. They burned it, and we can actually make that somewhat messy so that it's still vaguely hand-shaped, but it can also show that there was a high degree of damage taking place there, that it made it burned away and charred various areas. And also from that, I might raise it above the hand so that smoke and other damage can be seen, and also just give the hand still have it hand-like, but give it an ethereal kind of smearing. Those are just some ideas for the sense of the magic there. Okay. Okay, Escher, if that's good, I'm gonna grab the next one, and if you have any questions, just throw it in, and I'll grab onto those as we go. Let's see. Let me grab the image real quick. Okay. All right, Leap. So tell me a little bit about this piece, and if there was what areas were you looking to address, or might like commentary or some thoughts on? Very clean. Very nice. I like it. Not guilty. Okay, so my goal with this was to make a render meshing something high-tech with a more organic environment. The main character in the middle is named Yoru. and it's meant to be some sort of high-tech futuristic robot who is designed to coexist with life and nature. Okay. All right. Okay. Were there? I mean, everything looks fairly cohesive there. There might be a couple of things I'd suggest for presentation, but tell me a little bit about the technical things that you might be looking for, and a little bit of the atmosphere you were trying to give to the picture, because ideas are something I might throw out here might be totally inappropriate. I mean, just coming in as somebody whose pen is all ready to go is not always the most productive thing in the world. So it might be you've hit the nail on the head for exactly what you wanted to do, and me tinkering with it might not add any assistance at all. I'd like some feedback mainly on composition and if anything looks clearly off about it. And you know what, I don't want to sound obnoxious about this, but this might be a highly variable thing. Like I come at these things differently often than other people who you may get advice or input from, because I try to come in as much like the unknowing audience as possible when looking at it, trying to catch the spirit that the artist has turned over, not necessarily as a connoisseur or a behind the scenes sharing the stage knowledge with you. So looking at it and coming in as the audience, everything seems to be straightforward and cohesive. There isn't anything that jumps out to me as shocking or wrong or off. There are a couple of areas that, and this is where I'm going to jump backstage a little bit and see if maybe this is kind of some of the feedback that you're looking for, is the interaction, so where the focus is for attention. So if, for example, that'll work. That'll work. So what I'm going to be doing here is a little bit of relighting to stage this a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of bloom. Even to the point where I'm actually going to add some higher exposure and some higher contrast to a couple of areas to highly differentiate it from everything else around. Just the spotlighting cheat. It's not really a cheat, but it's just the tactic of making sure that the central figure is the highest point of concentration, even outlined. And also a shared point of concentration with the. Let's do that. Make sure it's. I'm gonna have it warm lighting instead of cool lighting, and then I'm going to definitely have the subsurface scattering amped up and up the chroma a little bit to have these guys stand out quite a bit from the other objects in the room, to show their shared interaction in a certain sense. Okay. And I'm also going to do a slight thing showing a little bit of the specific bounce light for the interaction of the robot's gaze. I'm gonna have this show up a little bit with a little bit of bloom. One of the other things I'm going to do is I might do for this, again for points of focus, vignette a little bit more. And also allow for that back area, since it's adding a bit of focus to the central area, basically acting as a downward or central pointer. Let me make sure I've got plenty of saturation coming in on that edge. Light fall off. More sharpness there. Okay. Right, I'm going just to add some more contrast and focus here. And make sure I've got some fairly good spec on there. One of the aspects, and you may know this or maybe not, so I'll go ahead and give over on it. One of the reasons that spec and glossiness and highlights are a strong tool is because they also are flavor signatures. When we human beings read flavor and through glossiness and through light transmission. So we can, like, if you think of looking at pulpy fruit, we read fairly favorably things that are light transmissive and have some decent refraction and have aspects of subsurface scattering that make things seem like they're succulent. And things that are succulent we often take to be sweet, which adds impact and a little bit of social value. Partially because part of the reason that fattiness and certain pudginess and plumpness of features are appealing is because of we read their transmissiveness and get a signature of sweetness. Okay, I'm gonna do a thing here real quick. I'm actually going to to this. And a little bit of glow. And even if it's to the point of supernatural, I'm going to have the greenness of the leaf really come out. So if it's hyper real, that might be just fine. Even if it doesn't belong, I think it's okay to fudge that. Okay. All right, let's see if that helped at all. So hard to say. Okay, I'm going to do a little before and after to see how it looks. Okay. So this is just to add some focus and theatricality to it. What are your thoughts on that, Leap? What do you think? Is that improvement or is that just difference? Oh, let me grab the. Okay, and while I'm waiting on the answer for that, I'm going to grab the next piece. Okay, one of Leap says, one of my problems was drawing emphasis on the plant. Okay, let's go over a couple of thoughts on emphasis. And even with a small element like that, there are a couple of things we can do. One of the advantages here is that it's green, so we can jump in and let's try this guy. We can add some spotlighting and diffuse glow. With the diffuse glow, we can also add more linearity. So have some diffusion of one property, which is the value, and with a little bit of hue, a little bit of color emphasis. The next part we can do then is take linearity and line and precise line as opposed to the soft line. We'll also start to have it stand out and differentiate. So having different properties counterpoint can sometimes help delineate. The other thing we'll want to do is set it so that there's some consistency if there is light coming down and light bouncing, light passing and transmitting, gaining chroma, gaining higher color trueness. The area around the pot um, on the floor we'll also want to address. Being that we have like warm light, we'll want to maintain that. Let's try overlay first. So we want to make sure we still have some right there. Add bounce light from the ground. Just take on a little bit more glow. So we can also start to let the area around them be actually spotlit, and up the contrast again. So let's grab some of that. And just a little bit. Fall off. The things that we'll want to look at most here have to do with what falls back and what falls forward. So there's a property called chromastereopsis, which is how color creates 3D. And you can look that up online, and you'll usually find red images in front of a blue background, because our eyes read different light frequencies as closer or nearer. And they used to use this in stained glass windows quite a bit. We'd want to use that now whenever you do something that has high chroma in the warm areas like red, yellows, even greens, warm greens like yellowy greens as opposed to bluish greens. They stand out in contrast against grays, cool blues, cool greens. So with that in mind, I want to take and bring up an emphatic, close, high chroma. Is that even going to show up? Oh, of course not. It's a multiply. Okay. Set a high chroma, high contrast area as a point of focus. A little bit of light decay. To help spotlight. Again, have linearity so that it also is a type of contrasting properties. And again, from there, depending on how much you want to exaggerate it, you can get more exposure, basically blow it out so it's white and almost is doing a rim light, or even and I'll show this extreme, a blown out value. Just to show high intensity. Or you can keep it subtle and increment up using various types of bloom, glow, higher chroma glow, those types of things. Things that put foreground to background, or bring one thing up in notice as opposed to the more damp down and diffuse. Did that answer the question okay, Lee? I'm not sure which one is actually best here either. If we do that one, if we have the one that has the sharp, the high exposure, coordinating that with the rest of the, you can actually blow that out if you want. With the robot would also probably be nice and cohesive. Something like that. Let's see how that looks when we stack it all together. Okay. So the original to the adapted. Looking at the two, and this, please don't take this as a criticism. But I think the back parts are all good, and it's good to have that information for context. But the focusing of attention, sometimes when we're doing an image, what we want to do is think of first, second, third, fourth, and so on in a hierarchy of attention. How is the picture going to unfold? So looking at a piece like this, you may, and it's something that I used to love to do a lot more than I do recently, but I used to put an initial piece, sometimes as like the first narrative, the first story, that has the, in this case, a point of focus that is clearly spotlit or somehow set apart, so it's high emphasis, high attention. In the background, though, I would then put other narratives. I would have like details in the background that once you notice them, they actually interact with their environment. And sometimes I'd even adapt so that even though it had damp down lighting, it was also impossible lighting, so that each of those areas could be parceled in a subtle way into their own stories. But in a case like this, in the first one, it does have more general lighting. There's emphasis on some of the other pieces, which is good in the sense that it helps give over a sense of scale and context for the pieces in the background. But I think that same sense of scale can actually be, the way I vignetted it, for example, those edge signals that indicate the perspective and the contrast in value between its lighter rims and its shadow areas. They're still visible, and they don't edge into conflict with the central piece in any way. This is assuming that you want it spotlit like this, like there's a central presentation piece. If you wanted it more that, like if this was an animated sequence and he actually makes his entrance in from a further area, this might work just fine, having the foreground areas have a consistent set of focus, whereas he may come in as a silhouette, and then as he's entering different light paths, as he comes forward to the camera, let's say, he finally hits a point where his he can be gradually brought in as a featured element, and you can play with the light. So it's, for a static image that's almost an advertising piece or a hero marketing piece, these types of tactics work. When you start adding motion and animation, how attention works shifts. So for a static image, the hero parts I'd put together are this, adding some subsurface scattering, higher contrast, higher exposure, high chroma for subsurface scattering areas, vignetting and damping down the background if not in chroma, in the purity of the color or saturation, than in the value. So as a summary. Let me know if that was helpful. Or if there's any other comments or questions you have on that, on my thinking on that. Okay. All right. The next is Rathamat. I hope I'm saying that properly. Let me open that guy up. Well, let me download it first, I guess. Sorry. And here's the information about that. This is for the course I'm taking on Learn Squared, still a heavy whip, but if anything's clearly off, I'd like to know. Here's some of the concept work done. Some details about the project itself is at the top of the link. Other details about the project itself are here. It's an old, heavily unused piece of marine machinery, a capsule used by an old man to sail the ocean blue. Yet now, out of nowhere, the man decides to put it in use one final time. It's been abused and worn down for years before being out away into storage. The rudder and sails are a heavy whip as of now, but the capsule body is pretty close to completion. If you see anything evidently off about it or a change or two I should make, please let me know. I need this near, if not perfect, since I will use this in at least 6 individual scenes. Okay. Let's take a look here. All right. Let me keep your information here as a guide. Okay. An old, heavily unused piece of marine machinery. Okay. Let's take a look here real quick. A few thoughts on this. So if this has already been in a couple of questions for you, and I know it may take a couple of seconds with the lag on the video and whatnot. Was this, so it's heavily unused, so it's been neglected for a while, is what I'm understanding. But was it at one point heavily used and then stopped use? So in other words, does it have 2 types of wear and tear? One type being that the salty ocean or the been in storms, dragged along ship side, any of these types of things, heavy use, are they there, or has it been kind of in storage, building up dust, rusting, neglected in some type of scenario where it isn't the environment where it would normally be getting wear and tear? So the area of made use versus the area of neglect. Okay, so one of the areas here I think we wanted to look at was the rudder and the sails. Also, a quick question, is the background for lighting use, is it like an HDRI, or is it set up for the actual setting? Like, is this now becoming air transport? Sorry if that's a dumb question. All right. The answer: it was initially exploited until it was abandoned. Okay, so there will be wear and tear and use along those lines. Okay, so for my first thoughts on, we'll just look at this part and then we'll grab the sales in a moment. And we'll just a heads up, we'll wrap up at about the half hour point. Okay, good. The background is HDRI. Okay. So a couple of thoughts for this are the rope needing, add a little bit of this as I go, needing some signs of decay and wear and tear and likely staining. Variations in noise frequencies in how the metal is decaying, the uniformity of it. So with any dents and changes in the structural form, there would also be details and cosmetic information. Like, for example, in some of the areas there might be salt deposits or other types of built up sediment. And also, I'm wondering about oxidization. Oxidization. It's probably a word. Maybe a word. And these might actually also be uniform in the sense of they're coming in at a certain level. So if like this was more frequently in the water at a certain base level, like if it bobbed here or was stored at an angle here, for example, it might have an area that was more or less open to the air. And if more open, it might have had more wear and tear, so there might be a bit of a stratification in the decay. Sun bleaching, that's an aspect I'm putting here. And if there's more than one type of material, like a brass or a bronze casing of some sort, it might actually add a nice patina to add some points of interest. And show some of the wear and tear and also types of interactive staining. So if, like, for example, the runoff from the bronze or copper or whatever the material may be ran down into some of the other materials and contaminated them. looks like. Let me grab the other view as well. Okay. For the ropes, I'd also suggest having some areas that might be highlit or bleached. Highlit, good lord. That might be bleached. I do this professionally. Especially showing areas where it might have either been in or out of water, and the fibers in the rope have decayed or worn, or areas where they may be at an angle, and the length of time they've been stuck in that angle that's become stiff and have snapped the some of the fibers in the rope going outward. A thought on the I don't know if these are flotation pieces used for I'm not sure what they're for, but since they have a pattern and they seem to be painted, the side that has the most wear and tear, or might be most exposed to sunlight, and the paint would become vulnerable. Those areas might be good to add some shine, and some areas where you can see that the underlying surface and material have come through. So far, is this information helpful for the direction you were kind of looking at in how you wanted to have this textured and adding some bits of clarity or advice? While we wait for the answer there. Are the sails, a couple of questions on the sails, are the sails new, or are they have they been bound up and with the storage of the original piece? If they've been stored, and if they're still in good shape. There's a couple of ways to look at it. Like one sail, we'll take one sail and do it one way and another way. If this one is a new sail, we'll look at a few areas of crispness, like how it's been unfolded and unpacked, and whether or not its seams are crisp. Okay, so the answer is the sails have been used as well. Okay, so if that's the case, then we're actually going to want to show the history of storage. We're going to want to make sure that the edges and areas that would be exposed due to folding have some wear and tear and grit. But we'll also want to have folding patterns, meaning that some areas that have grit around them are going to be also shielding areas where they're overlapping or folded that are going to look much more clean. So we're going to see some of the wrinkling or the history of the wrinkling, even if it isn't wrinkled now, in the written history of dirt on the piece. So if we imagine that this has been folded in, and I don't really know sail folding tactics, but I'm going to improvise and assume there are special ways of folding, like flags or sails. But when you fold cloth, one, it will often, especially if it's been around for a bit, it'll become stiff depending on how much humidity and moisture it's been subjected to, hot, cold, how the fibers, if they're cotton, the aging of the cotton fibers. But there will be history of its storage written in it, as well as its use. So it's like there may also be pieces that are stitched over, extra seams that show good sturdy repair, but still clear repair. And being this is in 3D, I'm guessing you're going to be doing some cloth simulations on these. If so, the areas that I'm delineating as wrinkle, some of it you might want to hold aside and actually have it be areas that the cloth will trend to fold around. And other areas just using surface mapping like bump or normal map to give over that there is, it does catch the light, it interacts with the light, but at the same time it might not be of, it isn't necessarily going to heavily influence the folding that and billowing that comes out later. These surface things might not be enough to constrain billowing or show any difference in the rigidity of the cloth. They'd be more like pleats, surface pleats and whatnot. And also for the wear and tear and the staining of it, I would also add yellowing. And seepage. So there's a lot of different types of noise going to go on with this because it's cloth. But areas where it will have gathered dirt or been in wet, it will also, the edging, the edges of that dispersal and drying will show. It will also possibly have mold. So that might also be another type of spray scattering type of noise that can be added. To some of the history of the cloth itself. Is any of this sounding good and useful? And is this the direction you were looking for in terms of like information on like how to age the sails and give over information for them? What do you think, Andrew? How am I doing? You know, it actually might be for if we think about it, the part like if we fold this over like it's a big tarp, and we've got this sail in front of us, and it's been in storage for a long time. It may be that dust has settled on like one patch, like let's say we've folded it 8, 9 times. I'm not sure what the limits are on a sheet this big. There would be one, and it might be the top surface area that follows an opposite rule to the rest of the wrinkling I mentioned just now, where it would be exceptionally dusty and dirty, stained, with fall off along the edges because it's the surface piece, it's the piece that's been sitting out most and gotten room dust or wherever it happens to be, where the rest of it's shielded, and we can imagine it having a bit of fall off. And instead of, and I think it's like grunginess would have a sharper edging and focus. But also like there might be a couple of cleaner streaks that would show up here and there, a couple of clearer areas, but on the whole it would be much grubbier than the rest of the piece. In fact, it may have run along the sides, and then we can actually see the fall off of how it seeped through over time and neglect. Oh, and from my own observation and original thinking, I think that the metal frames need to be thicker and more solid. I'm not quoting Andrew on that. Made that up myself. So, advice. But yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, so I'd agree with the solidity of the posts. Um, hmm. You know, I actually don't know the materials that modern shipping things are made of. I don't know how flexible or sturdy or what materials they are. It sounds right, and the look and visceral feel of it to have something sturdier that you'd be relying on to hold the structure up sounds right. I'm afraid I don't have the expertise to say much more on that part. So yeah. Um, if that's a good starter, I think I'll prepare to close out. Were there any more questions, or what'd you think, Rathamat? Was that suitable, and did that answer any info for you? Yeah, let me send these. I'll save the pieces that I worked on here out and put them in drop them off in the Discord chat. And yeah, any other questions? I surely could. Andrew asked if I could drop off JPEGs. I can surely do that. And I'll do that with all the pieces I worked on here. And a couple of the pieces that I worked on and was addressing a little bit from the previous sessions. So I'll close this one out, and I hope this was enjoyable. And if there's any other questions, we'll do this again on Thursday, same time, and we'll do other paintovers, and yeah, we'll see what we got. And if anybody would like, we can also discuss other types of things, or if you just want me to do a draw over or a drawing of my own and see what we've got in terms of why I'm thinking the things I'm thinking, or problem solving, anything along those lines. So as far as possible, we can keep these open-ended, do paintovers, discuss different topics, however you'd like to do it. So until next time, thank you, and talk with everybody soon. I'll be placing the images on the Rookies Discord server, and take care.